The Brazilian Grand Prix concluded last Sunday, handing over one more victory to Max Verstappen. There were several intense battles between the drivers to collect more points in the last sprint race weekend of the 2023 season to improve their positions in the championship standings. Mercedes drivers appeared to be struggling a lot throughout the weekend, and the results of this Brazilian Grand Prix affected negatively on their championship standings as well. Both McLaren and Ferrari drivers delivered some decent performances throughout the weekend, but both teams were not strong enough to challenge Red Bull. Aston Martin also showed a considerable improvement throughout this weekend, after failing to find its normal form over the last few race weekends. So we are going to discuss about the Brazilian Grand Prix weekend in detail. But before we proceed, hit the subscribe button and smash the bell icon for more exciting updates. During the one and only practice session of the weekend, most of the teams were not unleashing the full power of their challengers. That's why Ferrari teammates easily topped the timesheets. So both the Red Bull drivers and Hamilton were not inside the top 10 at the end of the first practice session. There was a contact between the slow-moving Haas of Nico Hülkenberg and the McLaren of Lando Norris at the exit of turn 11. However, both were able to come out of the situation without experiencing much damage to their challengers. Then the Haas driver had a ride over curbs at turn 4 and appeared to experience a loss of power. Other than that, no other major incidences were recorded throughout FP1. The qualifying session to decide the starting grid of the main race on Sunday started on Friday evening. Russell, who scored a victory last year, was the first to top the timesheets at the start of Q1. His lap time was not challenged by any other driver until the start of Q2. Both the AlphaTauri drivers were trapped inside the bottom 5, holding P16 and P17. They were knocked out alongside Bottas, Sargent and Zhou. Big changes happened to the rankings since the start of Q2, as every driver started to unleash the full power of their challengers. So Norris topped the timesheets and 2 Red Bull drivers were behind him. Alpine drivers tried their best to reserve a spot in the final part of qualifying, but their time was good enough only for P12 and 13. Both were sandwiched between 2 Haas drivers, Hülkenberg and Magnussen, at the bottom of the timesheets. No improvement from anyone, and all these 4 were knocked out from the next part of qualifying, alongside with Alexander Albon, who held the bottom spot. The final part of the session was started under the threat of rain, so drivers tried their best to record a strong lap time before rain arrived to the circuit. Verstappen topped the timesheets, and Leclerc, who recorded poles in the last 3 qualifying sessions, tried to extend that count up to 4, but he was a little bit slower than Verstappen. When there were 8 minutes remaining in the final part of the qualifying, rain arrived at the circuit, creating a low grip condition, so Piastri went off the road at turn 12 without setting a lap time. However, he was able to keep his McLaren out of the barriers and immediately entered the pit area for a quick repair. Clouds covered the entire circuit, resembling a night race, and the FIA issued a warning about the change of the climate conditions. A few minutes later, race control suspended the session officially, as it was not safe to continue. That means Verstappen grabbed the pole, and Leclerc was in second position. After a series of failures, Stroll and Alonso were able to reserve the top 2 spots at the end of this qualifying session. Hamilton and Russell were behind the 2 Aston Martin drivers, as they didn't get an opportunity to improve their lap times. Behind these drivers, Norris, Sainz, Perez and Piastri held the bottom 4 spots in the final part of qualifying. Despite the heavy rain on Friday evening, the track was dry enough to unleash the full power of the challengers in the sprint shootout. All the drivers were busy setting good lap times. However, the session was red flagged after an error by Esteban Ocon. After losing the control of his car, Ocon tapped the front wheel of Alonso at high speed and crashed into the barriers. Even though Ocon blamed Alonso for causing the accident, video footage clearly showed that the Alpine driver was the one who made the contact. The session was immediately red flagged, and the drivers who remained in the bottom 5 were knocked out. So Ocon, Stroll, Zhou, Albon and Sargent missed the opportunity to compete in SQ2. Even though Alonso was qualified for SQ2, his car was under heavy repair, so only 14 drivers competed in the second part of the shootout. Most of the drivers appeared to be improving their lap times, recording their personal bests. Norris topped the timesheet by beating 2 Red Bull drivers. 2 Haas drivers alongside with Gasly and Bottas were knocked out at the end of SQ2. At the start of the final part of the shootout, 2 McLaren drivers were able to top the timesheet. However, Piastri, who was in second spot, was beaten by Verstappen, Tsunoda, Leclerc and Ricciardo, pushing him down to the 7th spot. Inside the final few minutes of the shootout, Perez made a good comeback and improved his lap time up to third best of the session. Hamilton was able to push himself to the fourth spot after his final flying lap. But within the final few seconds of the shootout, he was beaten by his teammate into fourth spot of the final standings. That means Norris held the pole of the sprint race and the two Red Bull drivers were behind him. Behind these top 5 drivers, Tsunoda, Leclerc, Ricciardo, Sainz and Piastri held the remaining spots of the top 10. At the start of the sprint, Verstappen was able to take the race lead by beating the pole sitter Lando Norris and developed it into a clear lead when he reached turn 4. Fernando Alonso went off the road at turn 4, but he used all of his experience to rejoin the track without causing any damage to his challenger. Meanwhile, there was a wheel-to-wheel battle between Hamilton and Perez for the 4th position, and Hamilton was able to beat the Mexican with a clever outside move. Oscar Piastri also had a journey through the runoff area and rejoined the race safely. At the latter part of the starting lap, George Russell was able to pass Lando Norris, dropping the McLaren driver into 3rd spot. On lap 4, Sergio Perez was able to retake his 4th position from Hamilton with a DRS-assisted move. When Hamilton tried to chase down the Red Bull driver again, he came under the attack of Charles Leclerc, creating a risk of losing his 5th position as well. At the start of lap 5, Lando Norris retook the 2nd position that he lost a few laps before. On lap 8, Perez unleashed the full pace of his Red Bull challenger to attack Russell, who stole his 3rd position in the starting lap. But the Mercedes driver used all of his skills to continue his fight against the Red Bull driver and retook the 2nd position within a brief time interval. 2 laps later, Perez made one more move against Russell, and this time, the Briton was able to develop a considerable lead. Carlos Sainz came under the attack of Daniel Ricciardo on lap 12, losing his track position. However, Sainz closely followed the AlphaTauri driver and retook the position that he lost with the assistance of DRS. Ricciardo attempted one more time to pass Sainz on lap 14, and at the same time, the Ferrari driver came under the attack of Oscar Piastri as well. However, Carlos Sainz made 2 good defenses against both these fast-moving cars and developed a healthy lead. The Spaniard was confident about the pace of his Ferrari challenger and tried to develop a considerable lead with the rest of the pack. Meanwhile, Ricciardo was overtaken by Piastri after a tidy move on lap 14, dropping the AlphaTauri driver to 11th position. In the next lap, Alonso made an attractive move against Gasly to pass him to the 12th spot, but the Frenchman didn't want to hand over his track position without a good battle and went wheel to wheel several times. Finally, Alonso was able to complete his move against the Alpine driver thanks to his 2 decades-long experience. In the final stage of the race, Hamilton appeared to be struggling a lot as his car lost traction. When there were only 3 laps to go, Leclerc started to attack the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, which was running ahead. It was a very easy move for the Monegasque driver, as he didn't experience any strong defense from the Mercedes driver. Then, Tsunoda also tried to beat Hamilton, but the 7-time world champion blended all of his experience and the performance of his Mercedes challenger very well to save his track position from the Japanese driver. However, Tsunoda tried to complete his overtake against Hamilton in the following lap. At that moment, Hamilton didn't possess a good straight line speed with the loss of traction, and Tsunoda used that as an X-factor to complete the overtake. Meanwhile, Tsunoda's teammate Ricciardo also attacked Piastri in the same lap, improving his track position up to 9th. In the closing stages of the race, Piastri came under the attack of Alonso as well, but he defended the attack from the experienced driver very well, saving his track position. After leading all 24 laps of the sprint, Verstappen crossed the line as the winner of the final sprint race of the season. Behind the Dutchman, Norris and Perez crossed the line as podium finishers. Russell and Leclerc occupied the 4th and 5th positions of the final standings. After showing a decent performance throughout the race, Tsunoda occupied the 6th spot. Hamilton had to be satisfied with 2 points, as he experienced a loss of traction at the latter stage of the race. Ricciardo tried to overtake the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz with the help of DRS at the final moment, but it ended in an unsuccessful attempt, so the last point of the sprint race was grabbed by Carlos Sainz. Even before starting the race, Charles Leclerc had to give up on the hope of winning the 2023 Brazilian GP as he crashed into the barriers during the formation lap. So only 19 cars started the race, and the pole sitter Verstappen tried to separate from the rest of the pack from the start. Lando Norris also had a good start to the race by showing a good reaction time. However, he was closely followed by the Aston Martin duo and Hamilton. A big crash was recorded from the middle part of the pack, even before reaching the first turn. This series of collisions was started when Hülkenberg clipped the left rear tyre of Albon, so Albon lost control of his car and crashed into the side pod of Magnussen. Oscar Piastri was also hit by the accident, but the damages were not severe for a retirement. But a tyre came out of Alonso's car and hit Ricciardo's AlphaTauri, damaging his rear wing. Even though the safety car was deployed just after the accident, race control understood that red flag in the session was essential to clean the debris spread all over the racetrack. The race was restarted from lap number 4, and the starting grid was decided based on the track positions when the session was red flagged. As usual, Verstappen claimed the race lead again at the restart without much problem. Norris had to go wheel to wheel with Hamilton until they reached turn 1. Then the McLaren driver was able to hold the second spot, pushing Hamilton to third. However, Hamilton came under further attack from his former teammate Fernando Alonso as well. When they reached turn 4, Alonso made a clear move against Hamilton, pushing him further back. On lap number 8, Norris made several attempts to overtake Verstappen, but the 2023 champion showed a good defense against all these moves, using all of his skills. Meanwhile, Perez, who started the race as 9th, was looking for some quick improvements. On lap 14, Perez attacked Russell, who was running as 5th, and it was an easy move for Perez. However, Russell got the DRS within a few seconds and tried to retake his position. Perez's next target was to hunt down the other Mercedes running at 4th, and he achieved it on lap 18 without experiencing a strong defense from the 7-time world champion. Stroll, who was enjoying a great race after a series of failures, appeared to be attacking the Mercedes of George Russell on the 25th lap. The Canadian driver made his move very easily into 9th position. At that moment, both the Mercedes drivers were dropping down the order with some kind of issue. Stroll continued his attack and passed Hamilton for the 5th position on lap 27. Meanwhile, Gasly improved his track position up to 9th, beating Bottas on lap 32. Two Mercedes drivers, Russell and Hamilton, clearly lacked pace and got passed by Sainz in the 35th and 37th lap without facing much trouble. After waiting a few laps behind Russell, Gasly decided to overtake the Mercedes on the 43rd lap. 7 laps later, the Frenchman further beat the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton as well. After a long run with an unidentified technical issue, Mercedes engineers decided to retire Russell's car at the end of the 59th lap. We saw several great overtakes throughout the race, but none of them were similar to Perez's last-moment attack on Alonso. He completed a brave move against Alonso on the 70th lap, but Alonso closely followed him to retake the position within the final few kilometers of the race. Regardless of the great defense from Sergio Perez, Alonso used all of his experience and skills to overtake the Red Bull driver when they reached turn 5 of the final lap. At the end of the 71 laps long race, Verstappen crossed the finish line, recording his 17th Grand Prix victory of the season. Lando Norris wasn't able to attack Verstappen after the race restart, but on the other hand, the Briton was also not attacked by anyone else as well. So the top 2 drivers maintained a healthy lead with the rest of the pack throughout the race. The battle between Perez and Alonso continued until the last millisecond when they crossed the finish line. Perez tried to complete his overtake almost on the finish line, but he was late 53 thousandths of a second to do so. That means Alonso was able to stand back on podiums after a series of failures over the last few Grand Prix events. Overall, it was a good race weekend for Aston Martin, as Stroll was able to finish his race as 5th in the final standings. After beating many drivers throughout the race, Sainz and Gasly were able to record the 6th and 7th positions in the final standings. Despite the lack of enough power in his challenger, Lewis Hamilton used all of his skills and experience to save the 8th position of the main race. Behind Hamilton, Tsunoda and Ocon crossed the line as 9th and 10th in the final standings. This is how the Grand Prix weekend in Sao Paulo unfolded, handing over 2 more victories to the 2023 champion Max Verstappen. After a 1-week break, Formula One will return to action at Las Vegas, and this will surely turn into an interesting fight as some positions in the championship standings are still yet to be settled. How do you rank the Sao Paulo Grand Prix weekend? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel to get more exciting Formula One news. See you in the next video, guys. Goodbye.